Hi everyone. Let's practice working through some example problems to get us thinking about monopolistically competitive markets. So like I said, a monopolistically competitive market has three characteristics. We have lots of buyers and sellers, but we have differentiated products, and we have free entry. So which of these are most likely monopolistically competitive? We've got lobsters, blue jeans, scooters, and commercial aircraft. If you watched the previous videos, you know I can't stop talking about blue jeans, so it's going to be blue jeans. But we can think about this also. So something like lobsters, we're going to think of those as non-differentiated. So this one doesn't apply to them. Lobsters are lobsters. They don't taste different just because Francesca caught them. Segway scooters are going to be something where Segway itself has a monopoly, right? Segway scooters are specifically produced only by Segway. There might be other types of scooters around, right? The general scooter market, that's going to have a few entrants, not as many as something like jeans. And then commercial aircraft are definitely going to be something that looks a lot more like a monopoly or perhaps an oligopoly where there's just a handful of firms. And that's reflecting those really, really high barriers to entry to produce commercial aircraft. That's not something where quick startups can just start churning out 787 equivalents. All right. So now we have florists, and they're operating in a monopolistically competitive market. And florists are actually a pretty good example, right? People are buying flowers, but they are differentiated in the way that there are the different types of flowers you can choose, the way that they are arranged, the way that they're presented, and the way that they're delivered. So if they are operating in a long-run equilibrium, and we're comparing it to a perfectly competitive firm, what are those differences going to be? Well, as we talked about with a monopolistically competitive firm, in the long run, we're going to get a situation where we have a marginal revenue curve and a demand curve and a marginal cost. And we're going to produce up here, but this is going to be sort of tangent to the ATC. So we're going to be producing at a lower quantity and a higher cost than a perfectly competitive market, and we're going to producing at a higher price. This is different than a perfectly competitive market where our demand curve is completely flat. So the ATC hits at the minimum and we end up producing right here in the long run equilibrium. So that means the prices are going to be higher and output is going to be lower, higher and lower than in a perfectly competitive market. And that's reflecting that inefficiency. Now, if I want to identify the profit maximizing output for this firm in the short run, technically, this could be a monopolistic competitor or a monopolist just by looking at the curves. We actually don't know. Let's think about how we're going to estimate this. So first, we're going to find where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. I can't do it, right? We need a marginal revenue curve. We need a curve that comes down like this, right? So if I have that, that's going to tell me where I produce. And then I'm going to jump up to the demand curve, and that's going to tell me my price. So I just need that marginal revenue curve. Now, the other thing I could think about is, am I shutting down, right? So in this case, I should check. And so I'm actually, here's the price and here's the ATC. I'm losing money. Now, when we were talking about perfectly competitive firms, we talked about whether or not they would shut down and there's a shutdown rule, right? That actually applies here as well. So just so you can see what I mean, if it's the case that the average variable cost comes in like this, and I've got a demand curve the marginal revenue curve like this, then I'm going to profit maximize here. I'm going to jump up to the demand curve, and I'm going to be exceeding the average variable cost. So I'm losing money, but it's still worth it for me to operate because I'm paying off some of my fixed costs. But if it's the case that I'm producing here with my marginal revenue, and I'm optimizing up here, and here's my price, but the average variable cost curve is coming in above, then I would actually shut down in the short run. So that sort of short run, long run distinction actually matters quite a bit. So the marginal revenue curve is important, but we also need to know the AVC because this firm is in a position where it's losing money. Now, if we're in a position where the marginal revenue curve comes in a way that we're able to have positive profits, then it doesn't really matter what the AVC is. But so in that case, we really need to know both B and C. All right. So you can't see the answer options here, but they're yes and no. So now we have a restaurant business in a monopolistically competitive industry, and it's in the long-run equilibrium. So remember what long-run equilibrium means. Long-run equilibrium means there's zero profit. And that's because the price is equal to the ATC. So now Patty is saying that if she lowered her prices, she could bring in more customers. Should she lower her prices? What's going to happen if she lowers her prices? The short answer is no, she shouldn't. She's in equilibrium. But let's see why that is. So if I were to draw this picture, when I'm told that I'm in long-run equilibrium, that tells me everything I need to know to draw this picture. So I've got a demand curve. I've got a marginal revenue curve. And then remember, I've got a marginal cost curve. And this is going to be where I produce. This is going to determine the quantity. I'm going to jump up to the demand curve, and this is going to determine the price, right? The fact that I'm in long-run equilibrium means that my ATC comes in like this. So what if she were to lower her price? If she were to lower her price, she would be moving along her demand curve, and she would be producing at a point where her marginal cost is greater than her marginal revenue. So she'd be losing money. That wouldn't be a good decision. So she should not lower her prices.